Pluto was kicked out from the list of planets. When Pluto was discovered in 1930s, it was declared to be the ninth planet in the solar system. Later, after a long period of questionings and debates, in 2006, it was finally stripped out of its planet badge and was classified as a dwarf planet. But like, what is a dwarf planet really? Or under what circumstances a celestial body is regarded as a planet or dwarf planet? Like, what's the difference between them? Then you also may have heard the rumors about the ninth planet, which is lurking in the shadows of the solar system. The question is it really there? If yes, then how can we find it? And what will be its properties? Will it have any life? And there are many more questions you might have. Well, to answer these questions and many others are related to this, we have today a really special guest with us as a part of our theme of the month, the spinning off of the universe. I welcome Dr. Surud More for today's session. I also welcome all the members of the club and all the attendees here. Well, without taking much time, we'll start with the session. I request Jayanta to introduce the our speaker. Is Jayanta here?
Jayanta?
Jayant? Bhageshri, will you carry on?
Susik, you can carry on with the introduction. It will be fine.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So, Dr. Surud More is an associate professor at the Inter-University Center.
Rupali, can you please mute yourself if there isn't any doubt?
Yeah.
Okay. Susik, continue.
Yeah. Surud More is an associate professor at the Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, or something we know as IUCA, in Pune. Prior to that, he was an associate professor at the Kavli University for the Physics and Mathematics at the University of Tokyo. For his PhD, he was in the theory group of the galaxies and cosmology section at the Max Planck Institute of Astronomy. His PhD thesis was focused on understanding the galaxy dark matter connection. He completed his BTech in engineering physics from IIT Bombay. His research interests include galaxy formation, large-scale structure, and cosmology. So, without taking much time, I request Dr. Surud to start the session. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
To check. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks a lot for that introduction. I'm really happy to be among some of the amateur astronomy clubs. I used to be part of one of them. In fact, we started some of these things in IIT Bombay also. So it's a pleasure always to talk with people like you who are interested in astronomy. So the topic today is a little bit special. It's hunting for Planet 9 in our solar system. As I said, as you heard, like my name is Surud More, and I would always say that you should just call me by my first name. That's not a problem, right? And if that makes you feel uncomfortable, then you should call me by the name Sumo. That's even better. So you can follow me on AstroSumo on Twitter, right? So if there are any Planet 9 related updates, if we are going to hunt for Planet 9, looking at it through our telescopes, etc., then I post updates there on this particular Twitter handle. So please join. Okay? So this particular talk, as I said, is going to be about hunting for Planet 9. It's a big international project, and so that's why I have a lot of international collaborators that I need to work with. In particular, the first two names here, Mike Brown and Konstantin Batygin, they are like the central characters of this plot to find Planet 9. They are the ones who first suggested that there is a possibility of another planet in the solar system. along with a couple of other astronomers. Then along with them, I also have a team from Japan and US of Fumi Yoshida-san, Naoki Yasuda, Masahiro Takada from Kavli IPMU, and then Robert Lupton from Princeton University. So this is a small team. We are trying to find this ninth planet. So to begin with, right, let's try to just go past, take the time dial and go back to something like 400, 420, 30 years ago. Okay? So let's start from there. If you look at the sky, right, and this must be very, very familiar to many of you because you are astronomy enthusiasts. If you look out in the sky, you can see some of these planets, right? So what you're seeing here, for example, is Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Mars, Jupiter, right? So these are the planets which can be seen by the naked eye. And so until 400 years ago or so, these were the only known planets, right? The reason why they were called planets at that time is because if you look at the stars in the sky, these particular objects, they actually move around. Right? So they don't stay in the same exact position with respect to the fixed background of stars, but they move around, right? So to ancient Greeks, they appeared as if they are wandering stars. So that's wanderers is planetes, and then stars is called asteres in Greek. And so you put this together, it becomes planetes asteres. So it was only these 5 things which were known, right? 5 planets which were known. And what we thought is that the solar system just ended there, right? With these particular planets, and that's about it. Right? Of course, people were wondering what this universe is, right? And why do these stars go around? Is the Earth the center of the universe, or something else is the center of the universe? People were also trying to make sure that they can understand the positions of these objects in multiple different cultures, right? Okay. So this was the state of the art until 400 years ago. Right? But then something changed. Typically I would ask this question, so do you know what changed in between? Right? And I think the main answer to this is the technology change. Right? So there was a serious change in technology which allowed us to do better than just the naked eye, okay? Or to augment whatever we can do with the naked eye. Right? So the thing that had changed was this invention of the telescope. Right? So there was a Dutch engineer called Lippershey. He was the first one. He filed the first patent for a telescope in about 1608 or so. Right? So of course, at that time, the reason why the telescope was invented, because you wanted to see farther away objects, but on land itself, right? So you wanted to see ships in the distant, in the distant sea, or you wanted to just look at faraway armies, for example, etc. Right? So this putting together of lenses in order to make things which are further appear closer, that was something which this telescope made possible. Right? So it was a great invention. It was quickly known in many places, especially throughout Europe. Right? The great thing about this telescope is, even though it was meant for terrestrial use, it had far greater consequences for our understanding of the universe itself, right, and how things behave. Okay? So Galileo was an important scientist, right, and as soon as he learned about the invention of this telescope, he decided to make his own telescope. Right? And after he made his own telescope, rather than just looking at the things on the land, he took his telescopes and instead pointed at the sky, right? And that was quite revolutionary. And the reason why it turned out revolutionary is because it had the possibility of changing our concepts of what the universe looks like. Right? So at that time, the prevalent concept was that the Earth is at the center of the universe and everything just moves around the Earth. There were people like Copernicus who had suggested that, no, maybe not, this is not really the case, etc. But their ideas still had not gotten a lot of traction. Okay? So the prominent belief was indeed that the Earth is at the center of the universe, everything just goes around the Earth, because that's what you see, right, when you look at the sky. The first thing that Galileo did was he tried to look at, among other things, right, he also looked at Jupiter, right? And when he looked at Jupiter, what you're seeing here on the right-hand side are his notes about what he sees through the telescope when he looks at Jupiter. And these are things that he did, that he marked on different days, right? So 7, 8, I don't know exactly what date it was, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, etc. So on all these dates, presumably the gaps are because we had clouds or something, you know. But what he did is he marked Jupiter, and then around Jupiter he could see a string of few stars. Okay, and thought that they were stars because that's what people knew at that time, right? And he looked at them day by day, day after day, day after day, and what he observed is that these objects they are moving with respect to Jupiter. And sometimes all of them are on one side, for example here, then sometimes 3 of them are on one side, 1 is on the other side, etc. And these changes, they happen very, very quickly, right? So he soon realized that these objects must be moving around Jupiter, right, rather than moving around the Earth. So this was a big blow to what was thought of before, right, that everything is going around the Earth. Right? You could, if you look through the telescope as Galileo did, you could see things which are actually moving around each other. So that was a big blow. He also made many other discoveries with his telescopes, which basically overthrew the concept that the Earth is at the center of the universe. All these explanations that the Earth needs to be at the center, they had to be then thrown out. Right? So such is the power of observations. Such is the power of new technology. Once you have new technology, then there are many, many different things that you can do, and sometimes it can radically alter your views of the universe. So that was cool. So that was done in the 1600s. So these things continued, right? And then astronomical observations kept on progressing and progressing and progressing. But then there was this guy called William Herschel. Okay? So he was interested in looking at stars. Okay? So he was the first one who actually made a map of the stars in the Milky Way to try to understand what the shape of the Milky Way is. Right? So he was,
Sir,
yes.
Sir, Galileo was born in 1564 and telescope was invented in 1609.
Yes.
So how can he use telescope first?
Oh, so, I mean, I did not say that he did it when he was young, right? So he did live until that age for sure. He just had to be alive, right?
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So William Herschel, he, as I said, he was making a map of the Milky Way, right? And so he was trying to catalog all these stars and try to see where they are located, etc. So he was a very influential, again, astronomer. He was also trying to look for stars which are going around each other, right? So you saw that people looked at Jupiter and they saw the moons which are going around Jupiter, right?
Sir, I wanted to add a point.
Yeah.
Sir, I have heard about this man called William Herschel, and he had discovered Uranus. So before that, they had discovered till Saturn only.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I'm saying that before Uranus, they had discovered till only Saturn.
Yes, that's right. They had discovered only till Saturn. Right. Because those are the planets that you can actually see with your naked eye, right? Even today you can see, if you go out, and not in the cloudy skies, of course, but if you go out in the night or during the early morning, where Saturn is, you should be able to see Saturn, right, with your naked eye. You did not require any new technology apart from your eyes and keeping on observing the skies night after night after night. And then what you'll see is that the position of Saturn does change as a function of time. So in 1 month you will see it in one place, in another month it will have moved a little bit. Right? So all these things until Saturn, they were discovered with the naked eye. They were known to civilizations for many, many hundreds of years.
Yes, sir. It is said to be that Uranus and Neptune are the coldest planets.
Then coldest or
Yes.
oldest?
Coldest.
Coldest, yes, indeed, because they are further out, right? And so the reason why Uranus and Neptune are not visible to the naked eye, you can maybe see Uranus a little bit if you are at a very good site and if your eyesight is really, really good. But it's so difficult, it's just because they're so far away. So the sunlight, which is reaching them and then getting reflected and then coming back to you at Earth so that you can see it, it's extremely faint, right? And so it's very hard to see it with the naked eye. So what William Herschel was doing, he was trying to look for stars which are moving around each other. And while doing so, he realized that he stumbled upon something which doesn't look like a point. So all stars, they look
Yes,
like
sir.
point sources, right? Instead, he found something which looked like a disk, right?
Yes.
And so immediately he thought that, well, it must be something else, right? It cannot be a star. He can change some eyepieces and check whether the sizes change or not, etc. Right? So based on this, he could deduce that it was not really a star. And so the farthest away things that they knew at that time were comets. So he thought that, well, maybe he has discovered a comet. And so then he said, yeah.
And the name Uranus came from the ancient Greek god named Ouranos.
Yes, indeed. Right. So let me tell you about the history of Uranus is interesting, right? Because the discoverer thought that he had discovered a comet, right? And so then the question arises, so how do you know that something is a comet or something is a planet, right? So how would you know that? Could you try to tell me? How will you think people would know that this is a comet or a planet?
Comet is in irregular shape and planet is in maybe sphere shape. And planet's revolution motion is fixed and comet revolve randomly.
No, comets don't revolve randomly as such. All of
Actually,
them go
comet
on
Earth,
elliptical orbits. All of them go on elliptical orbits.
sir,
But
actually, comet has a tail behind it,
Right.
which is actually the fire.
no, it's not fire. But these comets, basically, right? So
How
if you
can it
look
be
at these,
fire
Comets are
in
so hot,
space?
so it shines. Planet doesn't shine.
Comet produces an atmosphere.
comet produces an atmosphere. No, yeah, I mean, comets can lead to like all these gases, if they collide with some planets, then it can lead to the formation of atmospheres or even things like water on the surface of the Earth, right? But if you if you look at these comets, right, it's not like they have irregular orbits. What they have are elliptical orbits. In fact, because if you have studied gravity and Newton's gravitational laws, then you'll realize that all of these objects, if they move under the central influence of a main figure like the sun, then their orbits have to be elliptical. Okay? So all of these orbits are close to elliptical. Okay. The thing about planets is many of their orbits are not very elliptical. They are close to circular. Okay, so that's one thing. And these comets, they don't have tails all the time. Okay, so they have tails only when they come closer to the sun, because things can evaporate out from them. Right? As they come closer and closer to the sun, it gets hotter and hotter, and then some of the material can go away. Okay? So that's the reason why comets have these tails, right? So one of the things that you need to do in order to know whether something is a comet or a planet is you have to look at its orbit, right? And check what its orbit is doing, right? And so William Herschel and other astronomers, what they did is that they took this planet, which was discovered, and they kept on measuring its orbit. Okay? And once they measured the orbit, it was clear to them that it's not really a comet, but it's more likely to be a planet. Okay? So that's what they were able to discover, right? So this was the discovery happened in 1781. It took many hundreds of years, right? So you remember We had started with naked eye planets, which were known to earliest of civilizations, and now you're coming to something which was discovered in 1781, right? So it was a gap of many, many years, and the reason why this was possible was the discovery of the telescope. Okay? So it was not that Uranus had not been seen before. In fact, Uranus also had been seen before, okay, in many of the other images. It's just that it was so faint that people just mistook it for a star, and they didn't keep on following it to see whether it was moving or not. So that was the only reason. But it had been seen by other people before. Okay, so once you have these planets which are known, right, then what you would like to do is to predict where they will be at any given point of time, right? And so this particular task of predicting means that you need to have a theory, and the theory behind all of this is Newton's theory of gravity, right? So remember, this is in the 1700s and 1800s, so the Newton's theory of gravity was well developed. Not only how things move within the gravitational influence of the sun, but even things like what effects do perturbations have, right? So for example, in the solar system, we just don't have only the sun, we also have Jupiter and Saturn. These are really big planets, right? And so they can perturb the orbits of other planets which are near them, right? So things like Uranus, for example, and so on, right? So these orbits can be perturbed because of the presence of Jupiter and Saturn, right? And so these calculations of how to account for the perturbing effects of Jupiter and Saturn, how to account for the fact that they are present somewhere, and then they can do a little bit of a tug or a pull on some sides and other sides, depending upon how close they are. This was very well calculated by that time. And so there was this famous mathematician Laplace, right? And he used to, he was tasked with trying to come up with he actually came up with this theory, right, of how the planets move under the perturbations of these Jupiter and Saturn and so on, right? But then he also had hired a student, right, Alexis Bouvard of his, and he was very, very poor. He came from a very poor background, Alexis Bouvard. But then he didn't even have a lot of formal studies. Only when he went to big cities like Paris that he started to pick up mathematics, and then he learned that he was very good at computation. And so Laplace took him in, he then became one of the chief computers. Okay, so at that time, computer was not like a computer that we have now, but even human computers, like people who were very good at mathematics, who could calculate things, right? So he was one of them. He then became actually very influential again as a mathematician and someone who became fascinated with astronomy, so wanted to understand where all these planets lie, etc., using the theories which were developed. Okay? And so what Alexis Bouvard did is he meticulously collected information about Uranus and its orbit. Okay? So he kept on collecting information not only of observations that were made after the discovery of Uranus, but he also went back and predicted using his theory where Uranus should be, okay, and in the past, okay. And so then what he did is he tried to go back to other pictures that astronomers had taken in order to see whether he can find Uranus in these pictures. Okay? Once he had found Uranus in those pictures, then he knew the location of Uranus, right? In the sky, right? So once you know the location, then now you can make an orbit. Uranus takes something like 80 years or so to go around the sun. And so it's extremely slow, right? He cannot wait for 80 years in order to like figure out where the orbit is, right? So what he did was he just went back, and people even in the 1600s had seen Uranus, okay? It's just they didn't notice it at that.
Sir, could you show the previous slides, because your screen went black for me.
Oh, so this, did you see this one?
I could see that one, but the previous one was not visible. Yes.
Is this okay? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Good. Yeah. So it's just the discovery of Uranus. Yeah.
Okay.
So once Uranus was known, as I said, so Alexis Bouvard did this impressive job, right, of tabulating where Uranus would be predicted based on the laws of gravity and where it was found, right? And so at that time, he was publishing his papers and research articles in French journals. So this is all written in French. This is one of his articles, right? And what you're seeing here is year in this table. Okay? So as far as 1690, people had seen it. Okay, so this is 1690, and then this is 1820, right? So Uranus was discovered somewhere around here, 1783. So there are lots of observations after Uranus was discovered. From
These are longitudes or latitudes or grid.
which one?
These tables.
I will tell you. I'm coming to what the other tables mean. So let me first explain. So this is just the year, right? The first thing is just the year. Uranus was discovered somewhere around 1783, right? And so after that, for 17 years and then another 19 years, so 36 years of observations are here. But more impressive thing is, he went back, and going from 1783, he went even up to 1690, and he was able to find Uranus in these old photos, right? So he went back roughly 90 years, and this rest of the things are 36 years. Right? So what you're seeing here, the second column, thanks for that question, right? So that is what is the prediction of the theory, right, of Laplace's theory of Alexis Bouvard, who worked out these equations, etc., which are listed here on the left-hand page. We won't go into the details of this. Right? He took those equations, predicted where Uranus should be. He knew where Uranus is. And what you are seeing in this table is how far away is the observed position of Uranus compared to the predicted position of Uranus. Okay? So these are all, I think, in arc minutes. And so you are seeing basically how wrong some of the predictions were. Okay? So it's not wrong by a lot, but there is a pattern in how these things are run. Okay? And so, as any good theoretical astronomer would do, he said that, of course, the observers are wrong. Right? My theory has to be perfect. It must be that something is wrong with the observations, and that's why we are seeing these differences. But he said, in the unlikely possibility that the observers are correct, somewhere in this paper, just below here, he says that if the observations are correct, it is possible that these kind of differences can come from a planet which is a little bit further out than Uranus, which is causing tugs and pulls on the orbit of Uranus. And because of that, you are seeing these differences. So that was one of the things that he mentioned is possible. Okay. So he had collected these tables. He wrote in this journal. Not many people paid a lot of attention to it, right? And he unfortunately died before anything new was discovered. Okay? But these tables that he made, they became the basis for the work by John Adams and Leverrier. What they did is they took the tables that were made by Alexis Bouvard. They looked at these tables and they saw that, well, there is a pattern to this, right? Sometimes Uranus goes a little bit behind the prediction, sometimes it goes ahead of the prediction, then again it goes behind, then again it comes ahead of the prediction. So it's like changing, right? Sometimes it's ahead, sometimes back, sometimes ahead, sometimes back, right? And so they said, well, you could think about it and say that this is happening because of a planet, and you can try to predict where the location of that planet should be. Okay? So this was the genius of Leverrier. What he said is, he did all these calculations. And this is kind of a difficult problem, right? You have some observations. You want to explain it by something else, right? By some other planet which is outside. And he said, well, he needed to do some sort of assumptions, right? He said he knew roughly how planets are located in terms of their distances. So he had to assume a distance, had to assume some sort of a mass for this planet. And then he calculated roughly where this planet should be in order to explain the differences between theory and observations that you saw in the tables. So after he did that, he predicted that it should be in a certain location in the sky. And he gave this information to his German friends. And on the first night that they tried to look for this planet in the area which Leverrier had told him, or had told them, they found another. Within a few hours, it had moved away. And so they knew that they had found this particular planet, which was causing the problems with the orbits of Uranus. Okay? So this particular planet, the new planet, the eighth planet, Neptune, it was found by Johann Galle and Henri Duhamel. It was less than a degree away from the position predicted by Leverrier in a single night of observation. So they took an image, they took another image after a few hours, and they immediately found Neptune. So this was done in 1846, right? So this was after Bouvard had died, but his predictions had come true. So that there should be a planet. But then this particular discovery, it was beautiful, right? Because it was the might of the pen. Just using theoretical knowledge of gravity, you could predict the existence of a planet, and you could tell exactly where it is. And when you observe, you could see it, right? That's the beauty of science, right? This prediction and observations confirming theories, etc. Right? So this was great. But then he became very, very famous, right? Because it's amazing to do these kind of things, right? I mean, you can think about how much sway astrologers have, right? When they try to tell you, okay, what is going to happen tomorrow, day after tomorrow, whatever, right? Even though most of it, like all of it is past, right? But in this case, he had made this prediction, and just 1 degree away, right? It was found, right? And you can think about it like this, right? The sky as a whole is about 40,000 square degrees, right? In this whole sky, the fact that he could point out where the planet is to an accuracy of a degree, right? Compared to 40,000 square degrees, you can understand how difficult it is and how cool it is, right? That science can do this just with theory. So this particular method of trying to look at the perturbations of orbits and then to find a planet was then well established, right? And so everyone wanted to be famous. So they said, okay, it was not just Saturn, which was the end of the system. People found Uranus, people found Neptune. So maybe that's not the end of the system. The solar system might continue, right? And so this became an industry. People just started to look for the orbits, all of these orbits, and try to find out whether there are anomalies, differences between what theory predicts and what observation shows. Okay? So some of the most famous predictions came from Percival Lowell. He said that there should be a planet X based on the fact that the orbit of Uranus was still not exactly explained by the presence of Neptune. So there were perturbations to these orbits too, and he said that there has to be something beyond Neptune which is causing these perturbations. And so he basically built an observatory in order to detect this new planet, the planet X, as he called it, because it was not discovered that time. Right? So this particular observatory was built in Flagstaff, Arizona, and they were basically trying to look at the sky at many, many places to try to find this planet. Unfortunately, Percival died. He could not find his planet X. And so this particular work was then taken up by Clyde Tombaugh, who you see in the right-hand picture. So he continued this work of Percival Lowell, trying to look for the planet X. And lo and behold, he did find something. Okay? So what I'm going to show you next are discovery images of something which was found beyond Neptune. Okay? And it was thought to be something which is going to perturb the orbits of Uranus and Neptune. Right? In order to perturb these orbits, remember the reason why Jupiter perturbs the orbits of Uranus and Neptune, or Saturn does that, is because they are really massive. Right? And so in order to perturb these orbits even more, you need to have something more massive, right? Or something really massive out there, which could then influence these orbits. Okay? So what Clyde Tombaugh did is he was able to find this Pluto, this particular planet at that time called Pluto, right? So these are the discovery images of Pluto. Right? And so what I'm going to do next is to move through these images And remember, planets move with respect to the fixed background of stars, right? So I'm going to show you two images. You have to look at them and tell me where the planet is, right? And whether you can see something move around. Okay? So this is the first image. This is the next image. First image, next image. So you just tell me whether you can see something near the center or on the top or on the bottom, something that is moving.
On the top. On
Yes.
the top.
Top. Is it top?
On the top.
Okay, there are some things which are moving on the top, right? Remember, these are images which are taken of the sky.
Can you,
Exactly.
can you show the first image again?
Yes, I will do that. Just a moment, right? So you remember that when you take these images, you cannot always really point at the same exact location in the sky. So some of these things just move because your camera was not pointed exactly in the same direction, right? So you have to look at these patterns and you have to see whether something is moving with respect to the pattern. So let me give you a hint, okay? So just take a look at things here and here somewhere, okay? Here and here somewhere, near the middle of the images, and tell me if you can see something interesting, okay? How do you see something?
Yes. Can I say?
Yes. So,
Or a little
this
dot
particular
disappears in the second image.
right. So a little dot which is here, right? It disappears. It disappears in the second image and it goes here.
And a new dot comes here.
A new dot comes up, right? So it is the exact same dot which has just moved from one location to the other. Okay? So that's what's happening, right? So these are the discovery images of Pluto, right? So it was again really, really cool, right? What you have to do in order to detect a planet is to take an image, take another image a few hours apart and see whether something is moving. So nothing has changed much. Even today, the way we try to look for a planet is doing exactly this, right? You take images, you take another image and try to see whether something's okay. Okay, so after this, Pluto was discovered, right? It was a big thing, right? Because it's after the discovery of Neptune, it was many, many years, right? It was about 80 years or so, after which another new planet was discovered, right? And so this was on the front news of the newspapers at that time. This is, for example, the New York Times, saying 9th planet discovered on the edge of the solar system. It was really, really far, right? First found in 84 years. So this was a big thing at that time because planet discoveries don't happen often. Remember, we knew about 5 planets with the naked eye, but then 3 of them were later on discovered in the last 300 years.
But why was the name of the planet is called Pluto? Why not any other name?
Right, so that's a good question. We don't know. I think it was named after maybe the Disney character Pluto, right? It was an American who discovered it, and so the naming rights go
I
to
think the planets were named after the ancient Roman gods.
They were indeed. They wanted to name them after these ancient gods, right? So, of course, I mean, this is the part of the history, right? And so, I will show you why it is important that Pluto is not a planet. And this particular piece of the talk will try to explain why it is. Okay, so if you look at these newspapers, right? So they were trying to tell it lies far beyond Neptune. Okay, it was sighted on Jan 21st after 25 years after the search began. Right, Percival Lowell had started this search, but then it was discovered 25 years after. Right? But I think what is important is to look at this particular thing. So the sphere, possibly larger than Jupiter. Right? So they thought that Pluto is larger than Jupiter and 4 billion miles away, meets predictions. So this particular aspect is something that you right now know is not true. Right? Pluto is not larger than Jupiter, and it definitely did not meet predictions of something which can perturb the orbits of Uranus and Neptune. Okay? So at that time, the fact that it was so small, then people tried to say that, oh, this must be quite an amazing planet because it has to have so much mass in order to perturb the orbits of Uranus and Neptune. But it is so small, the disk is so small, which means that all this mass must be put inside this small object, right? So it must be extremely dense. That's what they thought at that time. So of course this was not true, and once the moon of Pluto was discovered, then it was easy enough to work out what the mass of Pluto is, and it was nowhere close to whatever is expected in order to change or perturb the orbits of Uranus and Neptune. So let me put Pluto in the context. So what you're seeing things here are objects in the solar system arranged according to the scale. The sun is the largest thing by mass and by size in the solar system. But then there are these other objects, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. They actually dominate the solar system, right, apart from the sun. Right? So if you were an alien, if an alien comes and visits us, right, the only thing that they will look at is the sun and maybe these big planets that are there, right? Nobody will care about the dust which is out there in the solar system, right? So if you look at other planets, so there's Mercury, Venus, Earth, they're extremely tiny, right, compared to all these big giants, right? And then Mars is here. If you look at Pluto, it is one of these. Right? It's tiny. It's even tinier than our own moon. Okay? It's extremely small. The funnier thing is, it's not even the biggest other object in the solar system, right? Other than the planets. That particular thing goes to Eris, which was another thing which was discovered in particular by my collaborator, Mike Brown, right? And he could have said, well, this is also another planet, right? But he said, no, this doesn't seem right. All these small things, you can't really just call them planets. So again, to give you the context, let me show you how the solar system looks like and how Pluto looks like in the solar system. Right? So what you're seeing here in yellow are all the planets up to Mars, and then you go further and further out. So you go to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Right? So these are the giants. And then after this, what you're seeing is the orbit of Pluto. And when you look at it this way, you can see already that something is odd about the orbit of Jupiter. Of Pluto. Right? And the reason that it is odd is many of these planets, or almost all of the planets, they go on roughly circular orbits. Right? There are small ellipticities, but it's not huge. Right? While if you look at Pluto, it has a highly elliptical orbit. Right? It's not a circle. You can clearly see that it doesn't look like a circle. In some places it's closer to the sun, some places it's a little bit further away from the sun. The interesting thing happens if you just continue this animation. Instead of looking at it face on, now you try to turn it edge on. So when you turn the solar system edge on, you will see that most of the known planets, they're in the same orbit, same plane, right? But if you look at Pluto, it is well beyond the plane of the planets, right? So it is highly inclined compared to the plane of the planets. That's the first thing. The second thing is, after the discovery of Pluto, we have made tons and tons of discoveries beyond the orbit of Neptune. Okay? So these are these trans-Neptunian objects. Some of them you are seeing here. And what people have done is they have also measured the orbits of many of these trans-Neptunian objects. Okay? And so when you look at the orbits, which will come up very soon, you can see these objects move around in the orbit. If you look at these orbits, it forms like a nest around the solar system, right? And you look at these orbits and you say, well, can I really distinguish Pluto from all this mess which is outside in the solar system? The answer turns out to be no. It is just like any of these other objects, right? It is nothing special. It just turns out to be a little bit massive, but it's not even the most massive. Okay? So if you were to call Pluto a planet, you'll have to call all these other things which are there planets. Right? So that's not what you want to do, and that's one of the main reasons why Pluto got demoted. Okay? So there are scientific now criteria which are laid out in order to say something is a planet or a dwarf planet. So you can go through this, but you can see why it is not really. So then you can ask, okay, so what happened to the orbits of Uranus and Neptune, right? Is there something wrong with it? And that particular case turned out to be a problem with observation sensors. Okay, so you remember I had told you initially, Bouvard had said the perturbations in Uranus that may be just because of observational errors. Right? In this particular case, for the perturbations of the remaining perturbations of Uranus and Neptune, they turned out to be observational errors. And that was just because the mass of these planets was not known precisely. And it was only when the Voyager spacecraft went around and orbited these planets that the masses of these planets could be very well precisely measured. Once they were precisely measured, it was found out that none of these orbital anomalies exist anymore. Okay? So that's how things go, right, in science. Sometimes observers can be a little bit wrong, and then things can, you may be predicting something, right? So Pluto was predicted that way, but it's not really massive. And because of that, it basically gets massive. So then you can ask, okay, so all these things are found. Neptune was found, nothing beyond Neptune, just some nesty looking orbits, right? So is there something beyond that, right? So one of, as I said, my collaborator, right, Mike Brown, he had found this orbit of Sedna. So this is another object which is really beyond Neptune. The funny thing about this orbit of Sedna, which is shown here in this particular color, is that it's extremely elliptical. You remember the orbit of Pluto, right? It was something like this. So it was not that elliptical, but still elliptical, but not that elliptical. If you look at Sedna, it is even weirder than Pluto. So it's really, really weird. But the odd thing about Sedna is that its orbit never comes close to anywhere near Neptune. So if you typically have an orbit, so everything is typically born on circular orbits in the solar system. And if you want to perturb it to this kind of elliptical orbit, then it needs to come close to one of these planets who then gives a gravitational kick to these objects. And so then they go out into faraway reaches of the solar system, just attaining this kind of ellipticity.
So can you please explain this one more time?
Yeah, so suppose there is an object and Neptune is close to it, right? Then Neptune will give it a tug. And because Neptune is giving it a tug, now its velocity has changed, right? Remember, if you are at a perfect velocity, the circular velocity around the Earth, then you go in a circular orbit, right? You remember all these satellites which are launched, etc. You need to have a perfect velocity in order to go in a circle around the Earth. If you give it too high a velocity, then it will go in an elliptical orbit. Remember, that's how Chandrayaan was transferred from a Earth-like orbit to a moon-like orbit, right? Or an orbit beyond the moon, right? They kept on raising its furthest and furthest point by giving it a little bit of a boost by using the engines, right? They give all these boosts at the location where they are closest to the Earth, okay? And then once they give the boost, they give some higher velocity, then it goes in an elliptical orbit instead of remaining in a circular orbit, right? So if Neptune is close to one of these objects, it can give it a little bit of a tug, right, because of the gravity. And once it gives a tug, then this object, instead of staying in a circular orbit, it can then go in an elliptical orbit. But the funny thing about gravity is you have to return back to the same point where that tug was given, right? So if Neptune is giving that tug, then it means that these objects, the closest point should be close to Neptune, right? It cannot be detached from Neptune. Neptune is the innermost orbit, this innermost, the magenta, the outermost magenta orbit that you are seeing, that is the orbit of Neptune. So all these Pluto-like objects, right, they are hugging the orbit of Neptune. They are very, very close to the orbit of Neptune. But this Sedna, it was really odd, right? It was extremely elliptical and it was not even close to Neptune. So what is causing this? But when it is just one object, you say, okay, maybe it's just an oddball, something must have happened to it, who cares, right? But once astronomers started making more and more and more observations, then they found out more and more objects, right, like this. So in 2012, for example, there was another thing discovered, which again was highly elliptical and had a closest approach to the sun, which was very far away from Neptune. So similar kind of thing. It was called Biden because in 2012, the vice president of US was Biden, right? That's what it was named Biden. But anyway, it's highly elliptical. So again, two objects, right? So then once you find one or two, then you can find many. So astronomers went back, tried to look at many, many of these orbits, and they indeed found many such orbits. which were highly elliptical, and they were all further out from the orbit of Neptune. So what is causing this, right? So that was the question. But the ellipticity of the orbit is only the first craziest thing about these objects. Okay? There's another thing which looks strange, especially if you look at this particular figure. Okay? So the thing that is strange about these objects is that all of them, they lie only to one side of the sun rather than lying to the other side of the sun. So because all of them lie to this side of the sun, there must be something funny going on. Typically what you expect is all of these orbits will be going everywhere. It won't be just here, there will be some orbits here, and so on and so forth. Okay? So my colleagues Konstantin and Mike Brown, they decided to see whether there could be another planet which could do this kind of thing. Okay? So they had to run lots and lots of numerical simulations on computers, do lots of calculations on pen and paper. And after they did this, they said that indeed there can be another planet which can exist in the outer solar system. So this is what they published in 2016 in a research paper. And they said that, okay, let's look at these objects which are very, very funny, right? Which are only located to one side of the sun. And let's try to understand what can explain this, right? So these things are also in roughly a similar plane, right? A little bit inclined compared to the rest of the plane of the planets, but nevertheless there, and their closest points are further away from Neptune. So they said that if they had to put a planet which can explain this, then they had to put it in this particular orbit that we are seeing. So it is this orbit that they believe Planet 9 to be in. So it's roughly the same plane as you are seeing for these other distant objects that were discovered, which are shown in purple, right? And they also predicted that there should be some other orbits of strange-looking orbits, which instead of going in the same plane as the Planet 9, they go in a perpendicular plane. Okay? So this is something which is extremely funny, right? So from theories of planetary formation theories, you don't expect something to go out of the plane completely. But just because of these gravitational tug effects of Planet 9, they can actually produce these kind of weird looking orbits, which go at 90 degrees to the plane of the solar system. And lo and behold, such orbits are known. So these two exist, right? So this was a kind of a prediction, although these orbits were known.
Did Pluto really went in the black hole?
No, it didn't go into a black hole. You can still see Pluto with a telescope right now. Okay? Okay, so then the question is it really out there? Right? Remember, people have tried to look for Planet X for quite a few generations. They were not able to find any of these Planet X, right? Even what they thought of as Planet X, like this Pluto, it's not really a planet. And so Mike and Konstantin, they have made this prediction. Who knows whether it's really true or not? As an observer, my job is to go out there and search for it. And in order to search for it, we have to know where exactly to look. Right? And so with theoretical predictions that Mike and Konstantin have made, we know roughly where to look for the planet. Okay? The predictions are not as sophisticated as Leverrier's predictions. And that's just because this planet is really further out in the sun, and its effect is not like an effect on one particular planet. It's an effect on many of these planetesimals, right? And so it is not that easy to predict where exactly it should be. Roughly, we know where it lies. It lies in one of the most picturesque places on the sky. So you can identify this Orion Nebula. Then if you look at it, there's the star called Aldebaran, right? And then this is, what is this? Do you know this? Pleiades, right?
Ladies.
Yeah, Pleiades. Right? And so if you take a band here, somewhere between Aldebaran and Pleiades, that's where we expect Planet 9 to be. So the orbit of Planet 9 is somewhere here. And so we are trying to search the sky in this particular location in order to find this planet. Okay? Now this particular size of the sky is huge.
Sorry, Surut.
May I?
Yeah. Hello, I can't hear you.
Question?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was wondering that how did you come to the conclusion that in this big sky, it must be lying somewhere here?
Yeah, exactly. So
The sky is also 3D, right? So
yes, absolutely.
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's an extremely important question, right? So you look at these orbits, right, of these oddball things that were discovered, right? So these orbits, they are a little bit inclined compared to the plane of the solar system. And so if something is tugging these orbits and keeping them in place, if you run these computer simulations, which I actually skipped because of time, you can predict where that planet needs to be, in what plane it needs to be. So if you know the plane of the orbit of planet 9, then you can predict in 2D where that location should be in the sky. Okay?
Okay.
You can also predict what the distance of this planet is away from the sun, okay, based on the gravitational influences that it has. If you put it too far beyond, you cannot still explain these oddball orbits for Sedna and VP112 and these other trans-Neptunian objects that were found. Okay? And so based on this information, running all these computer simulations, they were able to locate roughly where the planet should be. We know to good accuracy what the plane of this orbit is. We don't know exactly where in that plane it lies. Okay? So it's a huge swath of the sky that we need to search. Okay? Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
So it is somewhere in this particular band. So these days, when we go out to the telescope, that's where we try to look for. Okay. Of course, to identify such things, you will say, okay, just go and look through binoculars, right? But unfortunately, that can't be done. It's an extremely faint object, just because it's very, very far away. You can ask me how far away it is. It may be as far as away as 300 times the distance between the Earth and the Sun. So 300 to 400. So it could be even further out. And if it is further out, then it gets even further down. Right? So you cannot do it with a simple binocular. And so what do you do? So remember, when you go out in the night and you're trying to observe something happens to your eyes. Right? What happens to your eyes is that the pupils they dilate. Right? So they are becoming a little bit larger so that you can collect more and more of the photons that are coming from the darkness around you, right? In the night, right? Whatever little photons are coming, you want to capture as many of them as possible. And so, in a similar way, if you want to see things which are extremely faint, you need to have big telescopes. Okay? So this is one of the world's biggest telescopes. It's called the Subaru telescope. It's an 8.2 meter telescope, right? You remember, you may have seen the 6-inch telescopes that you have, right? Where the mirror is only 6-inch big. Right? That also looks huge to you. Now this is 8.2 meters, right? Not 8 feet or anything, it's 8.2 meters. So imagine me and then putting me on top of me, like 6 to 7 times, right? That's when you will get the diameter of this. It's a huge beast. And it's an engineering marvel. Okay? So this particular telescope is located at the summit of Mauna Kea. It's in the island of Hawaii. And this is about 4,200 meters above the sea level. In fact, Mauna Kea, if you count from the base, it is the tallest mountain in the world. Right? Because most of it is actually under the sea. Okay, so it's about 10 kilometers if you count from the seabed. What the topmost point of Mauna Kea is, it's about 10 kilometers. From the sea level, it's about 4,200 meters. It's the world's best site for astronomy observation. That's why there are many, many telescopes there. But this is the particular one that we use because it has a big mirror. But in addition to the big mirror, it has a very, very good camera. This particular camera is interesting because it has a big field of view, which means at the same time, it can see a large part of the sky. And once you see a large part of the sky,
You said one mountain in the previous slide, which is the tallest.
I'm sorry,
You say yes, Mauna Kea is the tallest mountain.
if you count from the base, right, its base is in the sea. 6 kilometers of this mountain is below the sea. It's only 4,000 above that you see. So if you count from the sea level, it is not the tallest, of course, right? It's Everest, which is the tallest. But if you count from the base, more than half of this Mauna Kea is in the sea. So if you count from the base, then it becomes the tallest because it's something like 10,000 meters.
Okay.
Okay? Okay. So if you look at this camera, it has a wide field of view. Yeah.
Sir, means in this telescope, means we can see any about the planets.
No, we can do many things with this telescope. You can even see galaxies. In fact, a lot of my research goes on in order to look at these galaxies. So it's a very interesting, really big machine. So this particular camera, right? You can ask, okay, how much does it weigh? It weighs more than a ton. Okay, and if you look at the size of this camera, here's a human being, right? Roughly the size of a human being, and compare it to the size of the camera. So you can see how big this camera is. There's a huge amount of lenses in order to correct all sorts of issues. The main thing is that it has a wide field of view. At the same point of time, it can survey 9 times the size of the field. So it is. It's an extremely important camera because now we can look for planets in this huge part of it. So I won't go into the details of this. I'll just show some pictures. This is me standing near the telescope. So just before the observation start, we got a tour of the telescope. We went to the site, and of course, you don't see through the eyepiece of this telescope. You have to do it through computer. So this is me, Mike Brown, Fumi Yoshida-san is standing at the telescope. This is really huge. It's a huge structure. So inside a control room of this telescope, you can see all these monitoring stations, and we have to figure out where we are looking. We just keep on taking data night after night, right? And shot after shot. But the idea that we do is exactly the same idea as flight top budget. Take one image, take another image, and see whether something has moved. So when
Can you show some photos clicked by the telescope? So
yes, I'm going to show you. That's what's coming next. Okay. So this is, for example, one of the photos which were taken by the telescope. So you'll see why is this all red and blue and whatnot, right? So the reason for this is because initially when you analyze the data, you have to make sure that whatever you are seeing is focused on that. And so just like you focus your DSLR camera by moving the lens a little bit forward, a little bit backward, and so on, this is our attempt at changing the focal length a little bit, the telescope a little bit forward, a little bit backward, in order to see which of these images. So this image on the top, it's the same star. It's just that we defocus the telescope a little bit, and then we move along the focal, along the CCD a little bit, right? So the same star now now comes at a different position. Then you take the image, then you again move it, then you again take the image, and so on. Right? So when you do that,
So means we can control this telescope from the control room?
Yes, we control it from the control room. That's right. And so when you move these things and change the focus and so on and so forth, you can try to look at which of these images looks perfectly set. And that is when you know, and really sharp, that is when you know you have the right focus. So we take the images and display. So it's very similar to what you would do with a simple camera. So you wanted to see some raw images, so let me show you raw images. This is what the raw image looks like when you get it from the telescope. Right? So these are some of the CCD chips. And you see lots of junk, right? It is extremely hard to see. This is the beautiful sky that you wanted to look at, right? But this is the kind of images that we have to deal with. Okay? So we take these images, we have to clean them in order to produce pictures of the sky. So that's all. Those are all the things that we have to do. Sometimes interesting things happen. When we are taking a picture, there is a satellite which is moving around the Earth, right? So there are all these artificial satellites. They come in our field of view. So when they come in our field of view, because they are bright, they leave this kind of space. This line here, Right?
So, what is the name of that telescope? Can you say once?
It's called the Subaru telescope. Subaru. And so if you look at this line, this is a line left by a satellite. Okay? It's a trail of a satellite. So we will have to get rid of all of these things in order to find out.
This is the photo of space.
Yeah, this is a raw photo of space. Next, I'm going to show you a real photo of space. So this is one of the real photos that we get after we remove all these complications that I talked to you about. So the topmost image is a real photo. What I'm showing you here are three things. Actually, there are images. There are 7 images that were taken. 3 on the first night, 2 on the second night, and 2 more on the third night. Okay. So what we did is very interesting. And this would be familiar to someone who has processed images. So all the images that were taken on the first night, we made the color red. Okay, we put them in the red channel. The images that were processed on the second night, we put them in the green channel. Okay. The images which were put in the which were observed on the third night, we put them in the blue channel. And then we combined all of these to produce a colored image. Right? So when we make a colored image, if there are objects which have not moved at all from their place between one night and the second night and the third night, then they will look white because they have equal red, equal green, equal blue. Right? So they appear white. But now imagine something which has moved from one night to the other to the other. Right? That has happened. Then on the first night it was at one location. So at that location you will see red because there is nothing there on night 2 and night 3. On night 2 it has gone to somewhere else, somewhere here. So there you see a green spot because there was nothing there on night 1 and night 3, only on night 2. And then if you go to night 3, then something appears in the blue just because it was there on night 3 but not on night 1 and night 2. So this is how we can find things which are moving. Right? And now this kind of algorithm is something that you can easily give to a computer and try to ask it to find such kind of movement. So that's what we are doing. In fact, you can do something even more sophisticated. If you look at all these galaxies that you can see here, right? So all these galaxies that you are seeing here, they are stationary. We don't care about them, right? We want to see things which are moving. Right? So one of the things that we can do is we can take the image seen on the first night, take an image which was seen on the second night, and subtract them from each other. When you subtract them, the objects which are left, right, or the objects which are same, they go away, right? Because you are subtracting the same object on night 1 from the same object on night 2. And so only things which remain are the things which are moved or changed in their brightness. So that's how we can discover. So this is again the RGB image, but of these different images. So when you see these different images, then it's very easy to discover. Oh, there was something red, which then moved here to green, and then it moved to blue. Remember, these are false colors. There was nothing red at that point. It's just something that we have given to our image.
Which satellite you said weighs than more than a ton? You said.
No, it was not a satellite which weighs more than a ton. I'm sorry. This is a camera which weighs more than a ton.
Okay.
And this camera is located here. You see? It's extremely hard to see, okay?
Yeah.
It's located at the top of the telescope. Imagine something which is 1 ton sitting on top of a mirror. The first thing you would be afraid is it would drop and break your mirror, right? But it is a 1 ton camera. It's an engineering marvel, right? Remember, you can find new discoveries only when technologies change. Uranus was found because of a technological change. Maybe we'll find this new planet because of these kind of technologies. So I will end here basically by saying the search goes on. We are still trying to find it. Sometimes there are volcanoes which go off in Hawaii, then the telescope gets closed. Sometimes there's just bad weather, so we go there to Mauna Kea, and we have to sit there waiting when the clouds will go away, and we are still waiting, and sometimes you don't get images. But there are some nights when we got images and that data analysis is going on. In fact, Even last week, I was trying to analyze a lot of that data. When you go to Hawaii, of course, you can take many, many beautiful pictures. You can see some of these pictures that I have taken when I was at Mauna Kea last time in 2018, December 2018. In fact, that time there was a comet in the sky. And so this particular image that you're seeing, that is of that particular Christmas comet. So it's a little bit green as seen here. If you want a more high resolution image, I have it somewhere. I can show. But that's the team for you. We are trying to find it. If we find it, you will know it, of course. So I'll keep you posted. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was a very interesting session and beautiful pictures, of course. So we have some questions from the attendees, which
Sure.
Swastik will take over as a Q&A session. Swastik, over to you.
Thanks, Shavai. So like, the session was really great, sir. It was really fun. And then like the chat box was very active. And then there are like a few questions. Like what I'll do is that I will ask the person himself to ask the question. So like there was a conversation going on between, I don't know what his name is, like someone who was joined as Shadow and Eugene, regarding the discovery of Jupiter, Saturn, and like, can one of them ask their question, like what?
Yeah, I'm just checking it. Of course, Uranus was not discovered first, right? And Jupiter and Saturn were known for, I mean, many people, many civilizations knew these planets which you can see with the naked eye. Uranus was the first one which was discovered, which is very, very difficult to see with the naked eye. You can maybe see hints of it, but it's extremely difficult. So Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars.
Light गेली क्या मम्मा? अदूत बाबा.
Yes, of course.
Sir, Uranus was named after a Roman god.
That's right. That's right. So it was, there is all these mythological characters, right? And so the planets are typically named after them. In fact, Sedna, which was found by Mike Brown, and Eris, these are again in a similar continuation. If we find Planet 9, we'll have to think what to name.
Who had discovered the Uranus?
Right, so Uranus was discovered by William Herschel, right? As I explained in the talk. He was just trying to look for binary stars, so stars which are moving around each other. And while
Sir,
doing
other
that, he found this
planets are known by Roman gods.
Many of them, some of them are also named after Hawaiian gods, for example. So it just depends upon where they are discovered, how they are discovered, who discovered them. Yeah.
पृथ्वी स्वतःभोवती का फिरते रोटेशन.
Okay. So is it okay if I answer in Marathi?
Yes, sir, sure.
Okay, no problem. So apologies to those who don't understand Marathi. I will try to repeat it in English if required. So प्रश्न हा होता की पृथ्वी स्वतःभोवती का फिरते, राईट? आणि हे जे पृथ्वीचं जे फिरणं आहे ते म्हणजे जेव्हा सोलर सिस्टीमचा जो जन्म झाला त्यावेळेला काय परिस्थिती होती त्याच्यावरती अवलंबून. आणि पृथ्वी जेव्हा तयार झाली तेव्हा असं नव्हतं की स्वतःच एक पूर्णपणे मोठा गोळा होते. आधी छोटेसे गोळे असतात, मग ते छोटेसे गोळे थोडे मोठे होतात, थोडे अजून मोठे होतात, थोडे अजून मोठे. आणि ते मोठे होताना त्यांच्यावरती आदळापट होतात बऱ्यापैकी. जे काय मटेरियल येत असतं ते त्याच्यावरती आदळत असतं आणि त्याच्यानंतर ते एकत्र येऊन पृथ्वी बनतात. तर ती आदळापट जेव्हा होते तेव्हा तुम्ही विचार करू शकता की त्याच्यामुळे त्याला गती मिळू शकते. आणि याच अशाच प्रकारच्या गोष्टी होतात ज्याच्यामुळे प्लॅनेट्स जे आहेत त्यांना या प्रकारची जी गती आहे ती मिळाली. आणि तसं बघायला गेलं तर म्हणजे मग तुम्ही म्हणाल की ओके, हे जे सगळे ग्रह आहेत त्यांना जी गती आहे ती सारखीच मिळते का? आणि तसं नाही आहे. म्हणजे गुरुचा गोल फिरण्याचा वेगवेगळा आहे, आपला गोल फिरण्याचा, कारण की त्यांच्या परिस्थित्या वेगळ्या असतात. वेगवेगळ्या ठिकाणी वेगवेगळ्या गोष्टी होतात आणि त्याच्यामुळे एक्झॅक्टली जो वेग आहे तो किती असेल ते फारच म्हणजे त्याच्या त्या पर्टिक्युलर तो जो ग्रह आहे त्याच्यावरती डिपेंड.
सर सूर्याची गती
शोधू करू शकतो का? मला काही डाऊट नाही.
So let me just answer this question in English quickly. So the question was, why does the Earth spin at a particular speed? And there's no well understood reason for why exactly this particular speed for the Earth. Right? It depends upon how the Earth was formed, and in the early stages of the planetary formation, you have these planets which are extremely small initially, and then they grow because there are other things which come and stick to them, and then it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And when there are other things which are colliding, then it can spin up these objects, or even spin down in some cases. Like, it depends upon how they hit the Earth at that particular point. And so each of the planets, they have their own rotation period around their own. So that's nothing special or specific.
सर सनची ग्रॅव्हिटी जास्त आहे पण तो बुधला स्वतःमध्ये ओढून का घेत नाही?
That's a good question again. So प्रश्न हा आहे की सूर्याची जर गुरुत्वाकर्षण एवढं आहे तर ते बुधाला त्याच्याकडे ओढून का घेत? सो गुरुत्वाकर्षण जे आहे ना ते म्हणजे तुम्ही असं समजू नका ते व्हॅक्युम क्लीनर आहे. इट्स नॉट लाईक अ व्हॅक्युम क्लीनर. ऑफकोर्स जर गोष्टी मूव्ह नसतील एकमेकांपासून जर अशाच दूर असत्या, जर बुध इथे आहे, बुध जर इथे आहे आणि सूर्य इथे आहे आणि बुधाला काहीच गती नसती तर तो डायरेक्टली त्याच्यावरती जाऊन आला. पण तुम्हाला हे विचार करायला पाहिजे की बुधाला गती आहे स्वतःची, तो गोल फिरतो. जसं आपल्याला एखादा जर रॉकेट घेतलं तर त्या रॉकेटला आपल्याला पृथ्वीच्या भोवती गोल फिरवायचं असेल तर आपण त्याला नुसतं वरती सोडत नाही. पहिलं त्याला वरती सोडतो, मग त्याला तिरकं करतो, मग त्याला अशा प्रकारची गती देतो. सो जेव्हा तुम्ही अशा प्रकारची गती देता तेव्हा ते पडायला लागायच्या आधीच ते थोडंसं दुसरीकडे मूव्ह झालेलं असतं. मग ते इकडे पडतंय पण दुसरीकडे मूव्ह झालेलं असतं. सो ते सतत पडत असते पण ते कधीच खाली येत नाही. ते गोल 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 फिरत. सो गुरुत्वाकर्षण आहे सूर्याचा बुधावरती, पण त्याच्यामुळे तो येऊन त्याच्यावरती आदळत नाही कारण की त्याला ती गती पण आहे. ती गती असल्यामुळे ते गोल 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 फिरत राहते रादर दॅन डायरेक्टली. इट्स द सेम ब्लॅक होल्स बद्दल पण तेच आहे. ब्लॅक होल्स हे काही व्हॅक्युम क्लिनर्स नाही आहे. जर तुम्ही त्यांच्याभोवती काही कशी कुठलीही गोष्ट जर गोल फिरवत राहिला तशा अंतरावर ती त्यांच्याभोवती बराच काळ गोल 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 फिरत. तर ते असं सक नाही करून. So it's not a vacuum cleaner.
Sir, my question is, to discover new planets, we need the standard and non-moving background. So if we took the images and then later we found there was some errors, so do we have to wait the same background to take the new readings, or we can?
No. So of course that's a great question actually. Have you ever used your phone camera, right? You must have used it, right? So imagine if there are many different people, okay, and you are taking a picture. Sometimes you will see that and just look for some of the images that you have taken. Okay? You will see that at the edges, people who are standing at the edges, their faces sometimes get a little bit more distorted. So these same kind of features also exist when we take images with our telescope. Okay? So at the edges, the images are a little bit more distorted and less distorted. So on the entire focal plane of the sky, when we take the image, there are distortions, and so we have to correct for these distortions. The way you correct for these distortions is there are other surveys who have told us where are the locations of this particular star with respect to this star and this star with respect to that star, right? And so if you know these standard locations, then you can correct for the distortions by mapping this star has to be this star has to be this star has to be this, and so on. So you do these distortions to your image, or you try to undo the distortions to the image, and then you do this. So that's a very complicated process, right? And so there are pipelines which are written for this, and I work and use some of these pipelines. Okay, so no, you don't have to wait for the exact same particular kind of configuration to happen. You in fact correct the distortions and then you do the subtraction. So that's why you never do this on raw images. You have to process them very well in order to understand.
सर
Yeah.
तुम्ही जसं म्हणलं पृथ्वीला कोणीतरी येऊन धडकतं त्याच्यामुळे त्याला गती भेटत असेल, तर मग काही प्लॅनेट गॅसेसचे मग त्यांना धडकण्याचा प्रश्न येत नाही ना, ते कसे काय
नाही नाही, धडकणं म्हणजे इट्स नॉट धडकणं, राईट? इट्स लाईक तुम्ही जर कुठला गॅसचा गोळा घेतला आणि त्याच्यामध्ये दुसरा एक गॅसचा गोळा जर त्याच्यावरती आदळला, राईट, तो ते जे गॅस आहे ते नंतर इट बिकम्स द सेम ॲज ज्युपिटर, राईट? म्हणजे बराच तो जो गॅस आहे त्याच्यातला बराचसा पार्ट जाऊन ज्युपिटरमध्ये एकत्र येतो, राईट? आता तुम्ही जर न्यूटनचे जे लॉज आहेत ते जर लावले तर तुम्हाला हे दिसेल की त्याची जी गती होती गुरुची आधीची आणि त्याच्यानंतर जेव्हा आदळली गोष्ट आणि त्याच्यानंतर जी त्याची गती होती ती चेंज होईल, कारण की ते जे आदळण्याची जी डिरेक्शन होती ती जर तीच डिरेक्शन असेल जी गुरुची आहे, त्याच डिरेक्शनने जर गोष्टी आदळल्या तर ते जास्त जोरात फिरायला लागेल. जर कमी ह्याच्याने आदळलं किंवा उलट्या साईडने आदळलं तर ते वेग थोडासा कमी होईल. आणि ऑफकोर्स मी जे म्हणतोय की आधी जी पृथ्वी होती ती खूप छोटी होती, राईट? म्हणजे आता जे काही गोष्टी आढळतात त्याच्याने एवढा काही फरक नाही पडत, कारण की तुम्ही जर काही टन कचरा टाकला पृथ्वीवर कुठल्या तरी वेगाने तर आता पृथ्वी एवढी स्लो नाही. पण त्या काळात जेव्हा पृथ्वी छोटी होती, लिटरली जेव्हा पृथ्वी चालू झाली तेव्हा ती अगदी सेंटीमीटर मिलीमीटर एवढ्या छोट्या छोट्या सायझेसचे दगडांची बनली. सो हे जे छोटे छोटे कण होते ते नंतर एकत्र येऊन मोठे 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 होत जातात आणि त्याच्यानंतर पृथ्वीवरती बसतात. सो त्यावेळेला जर काही मोठ्या गोष्टी जर दोन दगडं आली आणि ती एकमेकांना आपटली आणि नंतर ती चिटकून राहिली आणि त्याची जर पृथ्वी होत असेल तर ते जे एकमेकांचं कोलिजनचं जे वेग आहे आणि ते जे अँग्युलर मोमेंटम म्हणतात ते जे आहे ते तुम्ही म्हणजे यू डोंट डिसिपेट, राईट? तर त्याच्यामुळे ती गती मिळते.
जस्ट एक्झाम्पल, जनरली जेव्हा आपण आंघोळ करत असतो तेव्हा पाण्यामध्ये बादलीमध्ये पाणी काढताना आपण जर पाण्याची धार आहे ती जर बादलीच्या कडेने सोडली तर त्यावेळेला आपल्याला बादलीचे पाणी आहे त्यामध्ये अशी जी इमारत दिसते, वर्लपूल सारखं शेप दिसतो. तसं इमॅजिन करता येईल आपल्याला की नवीन नवीन गॅसेस जर ते पाणी जी आपली बादलीतलं पाणी आहे त्यात गॅसचा गोळा आणि त्यामध्ये नवीन नवीन गॅस आपण ऍड करतो, ते त्याला अँग्युलर मोमेंटम देत.
आय मीन
असं इमॅजिन करू
अगदी म्हणजे एवढंही कॉम्प्लिकेटेड जायची गोष्ट गरज नाही, राईट? सो सपोज यू टेक अ बोट, राईट? एक बोट घेतली आणि ती बोट अशी किनाऱ्यावरती उभी आहे आणि नंतर किनाऱ्यावरनं कोणतरी जोरात धावत आला आणि त्या बोटवरती उडी मारली. ती बोट जी आहे ती ॲज सून एज त्यांनी उडी मारली त्याच्यानंतर इट विल गिव्ह अ मोमेंटम, त्याच्याने ते पुश होईल, बोट आपोआप पुश व्हायला लागते, राईट? सो इट्स जस्ट कोणी ते जे धक्के आहेत देर इज समथिंग कॉल्ड मोमेंटम कन्झर्वेशन, राईट? त्याच्यामुळे ह्या गोष्टी. बट यू विल लर्न अबाउट दिस. आय मीन इफ यू स्टडी अ लिटल बिट मोर अबाउट फिजिक्स की या प्रकारच्या ज्या गोष्टी.
मला काही शंका नाही, मला काही शंका नाही.
We'll have some interesting announcements.
I am not Antara, I am Narayanappa.
Okay. We might want to stay back if we have some interesting.
Okay.
एक्सक्यूज मी सर. सर ते आता परसिव्हिअरन्स रोवर मार्सवर लँड झालं आणि ते आता फाईंड करणार होते की ऑक्सिजन वॉटर मिळाले की नाही.
राईट
बद्दल काही.
राईट. सो पर्सिव्हरन्स नी बऱ्याच म्हणजे काही काही गोष्टी केलेल्या आहेत. टेकन ऑल दीज इमेजेस अँड द अनालिसिस इज बेसिकली ऑन, राईट? सो इट टेक्स अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम टू अनालाइज दिस. जेव्हा कधी रिझल्ट येतात ते पब्लिश होत, राईट? सो न्यूजपेपर्समध्ये तर नक्कीच येतात ह्या गोष्टी.
तर प्लॅनेट आपली
Go on, go on, go on.
विचारू सर?
हो बोला.
तर प्लॅनेट आपली जागा का बदलत नाही? म्हणजे
जागा बदलत
गॅलेक्सी म्हणतो, आपण जी गॅलेक्सी म्हणतो त्याच्या बाहेर जाणे किंवा सूर्याच्या जवळ येणे.
हा, सो त्याच्यामुळेच मी म्हणत होतो ना की यू हॅव टू स्टडी अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ फिजिक्स. वन्स यू स्टडी फिजिक्स यू विल अंडरस्टँड की these objects, once they are given a motion, they will just continue because Newton's first law, right? Unless there is some other force which tries to stop it, there is no friction in space or anything which will cause them to dissipate energy. And that's why they just keep going on and on.
So I had a question.
Yeah.
The new James Webb Telescope, what does that bring into this planet discovery?
The James Webb Telescope, right? So the James Webb Space Telescope is like the successor to Hubble, and so it will be able to take a lot of images. It will observe mainly in the infrared, and so for planet discovery in our solar system, it won't be that useful because it has a very small field of view compared to Subaru, right? For example. And so it's not something that will be helpful in the discovery of planets in the outer solar system. But once we find that planet, then we can use the James Webb Space Telescope to look at it because it will give you a clearer image. What James Webb can also do is also to try to look for things like exoplanets, for example. Okay? So there you are trying to look at many different other stars and then trying to look at their light curves or try to look at some of their atmospheres, etc. So these kind of things it can do.
Okay. Thank you.
Sir, I have one question. Can I proceed? I read an article on which says that there could be a black hole instead of planet. So can you clarify this?
Yeah. So, of course, in order to explain all these objects in the outer solar system, all you need is something which is gravity, right? And so, in principle, you could have something which is dark, which is going around. And that can cause the orbits of these odd trans-Neptunian objects to look like that, right? So you cannot be sure about what exactly it is, but getting a black hole to be orbiting the sun and so on, it's a more far-fetched possibility than having a planet, right? We know planets exist, which go around the sun, etc. We have never seen a black hole go around any star of the size of the sun, for example, right? Or at least a 10 solar mass black hole go around not even 10 solar mass, 10 Earth mass black hole go around the sun, right? So it requires multiple different things to be possible before you can say that it's a black hole. And so the easiest hypothesis or the simplest hypothesis is that there is another planet. And so we are trying to find it. If we don't find it, and then maybe there is another explanation. So, but people have not yet found any other explanation. So there are possible other explanations, like maybe you see these trans-Neptunian objects always to one side because it is only on that side that you have looked. Okay? That is one possible explanation. Right? And Mike himself wanted to make sure that that is not the case. So he has done detailed simulations in order to show that that is not really the case. Okay? So we'll have to see what it comes up and what it turns out.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Why can be just a planet in our solar system? Can it be something which is in another solar system, which is causing some fluctuations in this orbit?
Right. Yeah, good. So this is also related to the question that Sudarshan asked. Like, why don't planets just move around and go to somewhere else in the galaxy, right? So the reason for this is because the sun holds them there, right, in their place. So if you want to disturb the orbits of the planets away from the sun, then you need to have something else which is even more massive than the sun. But again, close by, right? Because gravity has two issues, right? One is mass. You need to have a lot of mass, but you also need to be closer. Right? If you are very far away, there is a million solar mass black hole in the center of our Milky Way. Right? I mean, it's so far away that it doesn't really affect. It's about 26, 30,000 light years away. So it is really far away, so it doesn't do any effects at all on the solar system, on the planets of the solar system. So if you want to kick the planets, you need to have something happen to those planets. Some other star needs to come nearby and then give these planets a push. I'm not saying these things don't happen. In fact, there are some of my colleagues who try to discover planets which have gone rogue. Right? So planets which were around their stars, which formed around their stars, but then because of some other star which came nearby, they got ejected. They're moving with really high velocity. So you can find such things; they do happen, but it's rare. Okay.
Generally, stars emit the radiation, and that's why we can observe observe the spectra in different regions like IR region, radio region. But we cannot do this in case of planets because they are not a source of the radiation. But still, can we use other spectroscopy ideas like radio detector to detect
No,
this?
I mean, you don't need just radio, right? You can do spectroscopy in any wavelength, right? And it's not like you cannot see things, right? So, for example, let's just talk about exoplanets, right? And how spectroscopy can be useful for exoplanets. So, how do people discover exoplanets? Right? So there's a star, and in front of the star there's a planet which comes by. Right? And so when it comes by, it blocks a little part of the star. Because it blocks a little part of the star, if you make a light curve of the star. So what is a light curve? You're trying to measure the brightness of this star as a function of time. So what you see is that, okay, it's bright, 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 bright. Suddenly it becomes a little bit dim, stays dim. Then it again returns to its bright. So you can see these kind of things that happen, right? So just by imaging the star, you can find a new planet. So that's the first thing. The second interesting thing that you can do with spectroscopy is the following, right? So the star is emitting the light, but it's like a torchlight, right? It's the background. Okay. Now you have a planet which comes in the front. Suppose this planet has an atmosphere. Because it has an atmosphere, the light from the star which is behind, it comes and goes through that atmosphere. Now the atmosphere may have some constituents, and some of the light from the star can get absorbed in the atmosphere of this planet. When that happens, you can use spectroscopy to figure out what is the composition of the atmosphere of this planet. So spectroscopy is quite useful. In fact, projects like the 30-meter telescope, which is being built again on Mauna Kea in Hawaii, they will allow us, and some of astronomers like you who will become astronomers, like you, they will be able to find these planets, find out the atmospheres of these planets, try to learn whether maybe there are any signatures of life on these planets. So it's quite interesting. The things that you
No, I'm asking that our visible spectroscopy has limited inputs because there are some absorptions taking place in our atmosphere. So, have you tried other spectroscopy?
Yeah, I mean, people do try all different sorts of spectroscopy in all different wavelengths, right? And so people measure the spectra of radio objects, like things which emit in radio, for example. That is not at all a problem, right? So all these things can be done. You have to, when you look at the atmosphere, right, the presence of the atmosphere, right? You only look in the visible range because that range is open to the atmospheric window, right? The atmosphere does allow transmission in those particular bands, right? So that's why we do spectroscopy from the ground in those observable regimes. Right? If you wanted to do spectroscopy in some regimes which are blocked from the atmosphere, then you of course do it in space by going to space.
Okay, so satellites can do this work. So we can
Satellites can do this work, or you can put space telescopes, right, which is basically the same. And then, or you observe in the regime where the transmission is high, so that you don't have to worry about it. Sometimes you do spectroscopy even in the place where there are these water vapor lines, right? So you look in the infrared especially, there are a lot of water vapor lines. So what you do is you look in between those lines. So you do a very high resolution spectroscopy. You look in between the lines. So one of the spectrographs from the Subaru telescope is called the time focus spectrograph. It is going to do exactly that. It's going to measure the spectra of many, many galaxies in order to measure their distance. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I am doing the internship now, and we are planning to study about the exoplanets, which is discovered by the PACE, that is Transit Exoplanet Survey Satellite.
Very
So
good.
basically, we extract we have a motto to study habitability, the findings of a planet in the habitable zone around a host star. So basically, we focus on the POI objects and found some of the candidates which has a potentially habitable. So basically, we want to study the atmospheric composition of that planet. So according to you, what should be our approach to study the atmosphere by using light source or some spectra?
Right. So I think initially the thing that would be interesting is to first understand what is a habitable planet. Right. So you have to look at the star, what is the type of the star, how much light it is emitting. You have to define the habitable zone within them. You have to also understand whether you can actually find the orbit of this planet, right? And to actually check whether it lies in the habitable zone or not. Right? So you need to know the orbital elements of this particular planet. So you need to do a lot of these things before you try to understand whether a planet is habitable or not, and then try to go and take the spectra of these objects in order to look for signs of atmosphere on these planets.
Sir, we are at this stage where we find out the parameters for the habitable zone, and we also calculate the inner ring, and by using the inner ring and outer ring, calculating the habitable zone by using some concept which belongs to the absolute magnitude, bolometric magnitude of the host star.
Right.
So we are at this stage that we are sure about the potential habitable candidate, but we have to find further about the atmospheric composition. So do you
Right, yeah, I
suggest
mean,
some?
so exactly. So you need to basically work out what are the kind of lines that you may expect to see. What are the easiest lines to go after? You will have to read the specifications of some of the telescopes, which could potentially give you this thing. Right? Some of the telescopes, some of the biggest telescopes which are there, DLT, Keck, Subaru. They have different instruments, so you have to figure out which instruments you need to use in order to get the contrast that you need to have in order to do these kind of stuff. So, I mean, that's basically what scientists do. Right? So they will write a proposal saying that, okay, we need to observe on this telescope. This is our science case. Give us time. And remember, time on these telescopes is extremely expensive. So one night on Subaru, for example, costs $100,000, right? So your science case has to be solid enough and you need to show that yes, you can analyze these data and that you can actually use it and put it to get the results out, etc. Once you do that, you write that proposal, you submit it, then you are in competition with many other scientists who are trying to use the same telescope. Right? So oftentimes, the number of hours which are asked for a telescope like Subaru is 8 to 9 times what is really available. Right? So it's an intense competition. You have to go through this competition, and then if the proposal is good enough, then you are able to do it. Your target will then be observed.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so I suppose that was reasonable.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks.
सर मी संस्कृतचा एक्झाम आहे आणि लीव घेऊ शकतो का?
Sure. Saba, you can.
Sir,
Sir,
Okay,
this is
Nandini,
the
you will-
question.
Sir, I want to ask about what about the solar system? How the solar system was formed?
Right, yeah. So typically, I mean, rather than our solar system itself, how typically planetary systems are formed is that you have this big cloud of gas which cools and cools and cools until it becomes very, very dense. And after it becomes dense, then you can have nuclear reactions which go off, right? And so that's how a star is born. But around the star, there's also clouds of gas which are going around this star. Right? And it is out of these clouds of gas, it's called a protoplanetary disk that you form. And from this disk, sometimes there are regions which are a little bit more dense than the others. And these little bit more dense regions, they attract more things towards them because of gravity. And then you form planets. Over time, the planets, they basically accumulate everything, and the rest of the material which form the protoplanetary disk, it either goes and sits in the planets or it just gets kicked out. Okay? And so then you just have the fully matured planetary system. And there are many interesting images of these kind of things which are happening even now. So young protoplanetary systems that can be seen. So there's a telescope called ALMA, which has been looking at these things in radio, and you can try to look for images of forming planetary systems using these telescopes.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to ask you what advice you will give to people who wants to pursue planetary science in the future, and what are opportunities for them?
Right. So I think the main thing that you need to do is you need to have a BSc and masters in physics. After that, until that stage, I mean, it's not like you have to have a particular like field in mind in astronomy as such. But after you do your masters, then when you go for a PhD, then typically you have to select a research topic, right? And so when you select that research topic, then you have to apply to places which are very good in solar system science. So that's what you will have. Okay. But the main thing is you continue your 11th, 12th, go through a BSc or BTech. And then after that, you have a path towards PhD. I mean, sometimes from BTech, you can directly go to PhD. Sometimes you have to do a master's and then you go to PhD. So both kind of possibilities are. Does that roughly answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you are looking something more, then yeah, you can ask me.
Yeah. So I will definitely ask you later about
No
this.
problem.
Now I request our fellow members to continue with the next part. Safti?
I think we are done with the question and answers. And if you missed anything,
Sir.
Sir, I have a question.
Okay, I mean, so one thing that we can do is you can put this question in the chat box, and while the other things are going on, then I can reply. Because I
Okay,
also
yes.
need to leave soon, so I just want to make sure that I
Yeah.
can attend. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
if anyone missed anything, then don't worry, we will be uploading it on our YouTube channel. And if you want to be the part of our little family, then I'm sending a membership form in the chat box. Yeah. Now I request Shree to do vote of thanks.
Yeah, sure. So before the vote of thanks, can we take a picture?
Yeah, sure.
All of you, I request all of you to turn on your cameras. So yeah, Swastik, you can take the picture. So I hope Swastik has taken the picture. Have you?
I have. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay. Okay. So, so it was really a wonderful talk, and we would have loved to listen to eternity, for eternity. But as you all know, time is the bound, and you also have something to attend further. So, and I would say the question answer session was really interesting, was really exciting, and indeed, still we have to pause for today. But I'm sure the curiosity will never stop, and it will grow eventually. So thank you for taking out your time to share your vast knowledge with us. And we're very glad to have all of your session. Also, I thank all the attendees, all the members of the club, and the co-audience for your involvement in the session. Until then, stay tuned, stay safe, stay home.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you so much.
What?